So let's talk about something that isn't really covered when it comes to EB1A and O1 profile building, and this also applies to NIW as well. And that is, how do you present a strong argument for EB1A and O1? And what do you have to do in order for your argument to come off as strong? In this video, we'll be covering an aspect of profile building that isn't really talked about enough, that actually plays a crucial role in the strength of your argument. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jason and I work with several top immigration lawyers, which is where my EB1A and O1 profile building insights come from. I also run a paid newsletter for $12 per month, through which you can get access to my newsletter resources, which includes a profile building opportunities database that lists over 400 opportunities categorized by field and criteria. You will also get access to my private group where members have been able to find co-authors for papers and articles, have been able to find opportunities shared by other members, and have also been able to find collaborators in general for profile building. If you're interested in these resources, check out the link in the comments. But going back to the video, what is this aspect of profile building that isn't really covered? It is to do with how well you can explain your argument to someone who has never worked in your field. So what that means is, how would someone who has never worked in your field understand that you have a strong argument, that you have risen to the top of your field? How you present that argument, how you explain it to a lay person is going to determine whether your argument comes off as strong. And that comes down to how well you can explain it, whether it's actually understandable. And this is not only to the officer, but also to your lawyer. Because if your lawyer doesn't understand the evidence you presented, doesn't understand your argument, you are not going to be highlighting the strongest parts of your profile. Because your lawyer doesn't understand what it is that makes your profile strong. So you're going to have to explain things to not just your lawyer, but also to an officer as well. And of course, it comes down to how well you explain things to a lawyer. And then also seeing how your lawyer then explains things in your petition to an officer. And how you make sure your argument is understandable is context backed up by credibility. What context means is the assumptions, the background knowledge someone would need to understand the claims you have made. So to give you an example, and this is a real example, I spoke to someone a couple of months ago and he told me he got approved on OPT, he got approved for EB1A, and what he did was he was able to create a machine learning model that helped change government regulations. Now, that in itself is quite a significant outcome, quite a bit of impact. But in order for him to have presented a strong case, he had to talk about the wider significance of his work. And that meant unpacking the assumptions and background knowledge that you would need to understand the significance of his work. For example, what impact did he have? How did this machine learning model change government regulations? What was that change? What kinds of benefits did that bring to his field specifically? And how, comparatively speaking, based on the impact of his work, was he able to show that he was able to create much greater impact than the other top professionals in his field? So in regards to this example, he was able to provide a lot of context, a lot of background knowledge required to understand his argument that he had risen to the top of his field. He was able to pinpoint exactly the kind of impact he was able to create and then provide references that established the context behind his claim, that he had risen to the top of his field, because contextually speaking, what he was able to do in his field was considered extremely significant. And he was then able to back up this claim with references from credible experts who affirmed his assessment of his own impact. And he was then able to explain all this to his lawyer, who was then able to really simplify this and explain this to the officer adjudicating his case. So that is what you need to be doing if you want to show a strong argument for EB1A. It is not as simple as just saying that you have all these significant achievements. You have to be able to demonstrate what significance means in your field. You have to be able to explain how a certain result is considered significant in your field. because that's not immediately obvious for someone who has never worked in your field. For example, if you've created millions of impact in your field, generally speaking, maybe in tech that's not considered significant, but in your particular niche field, perhaps that is considered significant because of certain conditions within your field. You have to be able to then establish that context, show how there were similar projects or similar kinds of work in your field, and they weren't able to produce that magnitude of impact, but you were able to. And you have to then tie this into your overall argument that you've risen to the top of your field. So going back to the original point then, it is about making your argument understandable, and that comes down to context backed up by credibility. Without context, you can't really make this comparative argument that you've risen to the top of your field because there's really nothing to compare it to. There's no context, there's no way to evaluate your argument, at least for the lay person, someone who has never worked in your field. So make sure you're able to explain all these assumptions, all this background knowledge, so that it becomes almost obvious how you've risen to the top of your field. That would be considered a strong argument, assuming you have that evidence. So it doesn't matter if you have strong evidence if you can't explain how it is considered strong in your field. How is it considered significant to a degree that then proves that you've risen to the top of your field? That is what you need to be doing for EB1A and O1.